Good afternoon. It is November 8th of 2023. We're here for Grading and Incentivization 2023-24 workshop. We're going to be diving into the IR simulation today. The US Gov simulation workshop has already been pre-recorded with Mr. Pingrazi. So without further ado, let's jump into a few things here. You know what? I'm getting really excited here. So basically the big goals are today to know where to access existing grading suggestions within the simulation platform. So where do you look for that in your instructor dashboard? And then how do you use a variety of methods, whether it be that one or more that we go over today, to incentivize your students, keeping in mind that you are the expert of your classroom. You know your students best. You're going to know what it gets them excited. So we'll talk through a lot of those. By the end of it, these are the hopes that you walk away with, is having more confidence in these two things. We're going to go over the IR dashboard. We'll go over grading options, and then we'll go over other incentives that you can incorporate. And I know, Nick, you have some of those incentives already programmed in, which is really cool. So we can talk about those more and see if there's other connections that you can grow upon. So we're going to move through this part, and we'll jump straight into the IR simulation. Okay, so I know that you've been through your IR side, but I want to walk through on here that sample syllabi. If you're looking at your instructor dashboard and you scroll down to the bottom, there's a bunch of different options here, and that sample syllabi is a really great place to start. Now, what I want to say in this is that this sample syllabi is directed towards college students and college classes. So take this with a grain of salt or a whole bag of salt, depending upon who you're teaching. And knowing that like maybe 7 for it's 11, 14, 15% of the class grade might be the perfect amount, or you might need to add some more things in there. And we'll go over some of those other aspects. But this can give you a real short snapshot of saying, all right, 2 papers, sim memos, a manual quiz, and then the historian's verdict based on, wanting to incentivize students to not provoke nuclear war in the sim. So that's a quick overview. You can see how it's written out in the sim or in the syllabus so that students can see how they would gain those points or lose points if they don't write memos, if they don't show up and participate. That is a very, very broad brush. So what I want to do more importantly, you know that that's there under sample syllabi. Let's go under instructor manuals and materials, and that last option says grading recommendations. This is a more descriptive dive in of those specific grades and how they work. So the manual quizzes, there's 2, each can be worth 15 points. And then the way that this grades it is all based on points. And I'll show you the breakdown of how that looks. So if we look at this overall, I'll come back to some of these up here. These overall performance points at the end of a sim, a student's going to have a total number of points that they've earned. And so if they are in these ranges, there's 3 different models that you could use based on these recommendations that will give them a specific number of percentage points of the class. So for example, this one is 5% of the overall grade of the class for their performance in the sim. If they achieve 27 points, they get a 4.1%. So if they had a 90, they would get a 94.1% in the overall grade of the class. That is also compared to a model that has some extra credit or just a total extra credit model overall. So that if a decision is made in the sim and students didn't have control over it and they lost points, they wouldn't be butthurt about not getting those points, but they still have the chance to gain those points. Each of these points are tied to those grading awards, and I'll kind of scroll up here to show you those. Each collective award is worth 5 points. The Global Peace Award, Save the Planet, Wiping Out Terrorism, and World Hunger. Equally, the competitive awards are also worth 5 points. And so when a student is playing, they're weighed the same. So it's really going to depend whether or not what you're teaching in the course is leaning towards a more competitive issue or more collective issue. Now, I say that because you can also change these points. When you tell students, hey, instead of 5 points for that Global Peace Award, that Global Peace Award is actually worth 25 points, that shifts the incentive for them to potentially go after that one overall. Now, it doesn't mean every student will. You had a couple students, Mark last year, who was just like, I just want to see how
Well,
war is going to work.
I mean, to be fair to his credit, he knew he had a strategy going in, and he wanted to win all of the competitive awards, which means he by having the most resources, by taking over the Sapphire Island and getting his country to be in charge, he had the best opportunity to win all of these awards. However, with power comes great responsibility, and he had none of that. So he actively sought out other countries to fight because he did want to see how war worked, and that did impact the whole simulation, but it made it impact for the good of the simulation.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed as though like the other students had to really ground themselves and to find those alliances, and maybe they didn't achieve all of these awards or any of those awards, but they still were able to come together in a way that brought out some of the other concepts in your class.
It definitely created a more complex social dilemma that they had to figure out, but it was a great growing opportunity for those students to like understand how alliances work. Like, can you trust them the entire time, or are they only trustworthy as far as your I guess goals are aligned?
And that brings up another point in this, in that like you didn't anticipate that coming to fruition. And
No.
now moving into your second year using it, maybe having the incentive to say, hey, if you form an alliance, you get 5 points, or having ways to really encourage them in those interactions so that they do bring about some of those social complexities that you talked about could be
Mhm.
helpful for you just to know now, all right, how do I plug this into my grading for those students? But yeah, they definitely went after the competitive one, so that was fun to watch.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, then the last one here is the quality of life. And so these are ways that the students are investing in their domestic programs and structures on an average of the entire simulation. And so if they reach a quality of life of 700 or more for their people, they get 12 points. Between 469, 699 is 9 points, and so on and so forth. So if they're really focused on that investment, it's not it's not a it's not as much of an international stage deal, besides the fact that trading probably needs to happen in terms of gaining the resources to invest. Um, so yeah, this grading recommendations matrix can help you in just kind of seeing what it could look like. It doesn't mean you have to use this, and also you can create your own, but I highly recommend looking at this as an option for your class. And again, that's under the instructional materials, under instructor manual, and materials at the bottom of that. The last part on this is the gradebook report. So we'll jump into a finished simulation here. At the end of the sim, where you go to look up those points is under the gradebook and then the gradebook report. And this is where you'll see all these students, and these are all made up students, and their total scores on the side. And you can click on the top, and it will sort by the highest or lowest. Every time you click on it, it switches both sides. So you get to see those up front. Notice there's a couple pieces in here that we'll get into a little bit later. The manual quizzes, peer evaluations that are in addition to all those other goals that they've been going after for that sim. All right, so that is the instructor dashboard. Any questions on that one to start?
No, I think we're good.
Cool.
Me and
Uh,
everyone else here.
let's jump into the next one here, which is some minimum grading options recommendation. Now, this is high school classes and middle school classes, mainly because there's more context that might be required for these students to gain that connection between the sim and their class. In colleges, it's a lot more about the exams and the presentations that can take up a bit of their coursework. So for this one, a big part is just registering for the sim. You want to make sure that they're registering on time. Ideally, it's at least a week before the sim starts. I know that that's not always possible, but if you make that 1% of their grade, well, if you make that 1% of their grade, it can be really helpful in just encouraging them. Hey, you got to do it. It's like putting your name on the SATs. You get a point for that kind of thing. Um, the next part is the manual quiz. These are an option in the IR full, not the IR light. But they are accessible. I should show you this. They are accessible in the dashboard. So if you did want to take them out of the dashboard and put them in a Google form, you could do that as well under manual quizzes. So you can look at those student quizzes here and copy paste. So you have access to all those, and all of the answers to these are actually within the simulation. So if you went into one of your sims, it doesn't matter if it's completed or not, and you clicked on that quizzes list, you could see what those correct answers are for each of those. So just
I
know
was
that
going to
it's
say that I know when I did it last year doing the light version of my middle schoolers that I was unable to put those quizzes into the sim,
Mhm.
but I could copy the questions and answers into our Canvas classroom or other online classroom, whatever anyone else uses. And we did it so that it earned them resource points, which initially they didn't know a whole lot about, but we continue to use those throughout the simulation, and they kind of started picking up, oh, I can get what I need by doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Mhm.
And that was
I'm
like our
really
incentive for it.
Yeah, those resource quizzes are absolutely an awesome piece of the puzzle. And I know that that's not on the IR light part, but if would you just give them resources based on the quizzes that they answered in their Canvas?
So for those early ones, we kind of let them choose anything outside of political capital and I think scientific knowledge,
Hmm.
because political capital, you can obviously enact a lot of stuff if you have a lot of it. And scientific knowledge, if they got, an extra 150 scientific knowledge, that could speed up resource production. So, or like a different, researching thing,
Hmm. Technologies.
technology. Thank you. And so we kind of thought that was a little bit of an unfair advantage for those who may not have known about it beforehand.
Well, I'm really glad that you found the way around it. IR Lite doesn't have all the bells and whistles, of course. So using the IR Full does have those, and there is a resource quiz option that I'll go into later. So I'm glad that you worked the system to benefit your students in the ways that you saw fit too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in addition to that, I mean, we have the weekly memos. If this is something, I know that you've done this a little bit and you messed around with a number of characters that were required for those memos, but
Yep.
this is something that would be really helpful for students to connect back to those classes. And whether that be the class that you're teaching or another class that they're involved in that's connected to it. But these weekly memos can be really helpful for the strategy that they've decided on in the beginning and to evaluate that strategy, to connect to a specific part of your class, specifically for writing purposes and grammar and punctuation. There's a lot of different ways that you can grade those, but at least for the simplicity of it, a completion grade can be very helpful so that they can utilize each of these as a starting point when it comes to their debrief presentation or paper.
Yeah. The beauty
Uh,
of those were that you could set up what you want that memo to talk about that week. And so if you are tailoring to whatever classroom you're doing, you can put that idea in there for them to talk about.
Now, did you have a list of prompts for them this year or this past year?
This past year, no, because it was my first time. It was more like, how does being in your role affect your country strategy? What have you been doing? Because that's kind of what we talked about prior to it. But now, having done it once before, I have a better idea of how I can connect it and relate it to our unit of misinformation in media and tie it into the other social studies aspects with their declaration and constitutions.
Nice. Okay, so this is really becoming a more cohesive approach.
Yeah.
with those memo prompts. Okay. And then those, I'm curious, like, I put a presentation here, but that can also be a individual paper of sorts. The reason I put presentation in the minimum one is really helpful to pull back the curtain, to really understand what a country's concepts of strategy were from the beginning to the end, so that you can say, oh my gosh, I thought we were friends this whole time, and you were using me the whole time, actually. But it may not turn out to be that. It could have been completely cordial, and we ended up, having a really healthy world. But having those presentations gives those students a chance to chat about what has happened, to gain those skills. What are your thoughts?
So I would recommend anyone doing at least middle school and possibly high school when they do those debrief presentations is to keep those countries together because they're so, I guess, emotionally invested in their own country and their team and everything like that. That when I had separated them last year, like, all right, like Mark, for instance, was put and separated from his country and put with other people that he had fought and attacked and, you know, might have destroyed. And so they didn't want to listen to anything he said. They were just kind of upset with him still because their country was attacked. And so I feel like it was a disservice to their country to explain their line of reasoning because the emotions were still really high after the simulation that they were just blinded.
So it would be helpful to have them still in their countries to make it so that they could still be as open and honest as it would be helpful in presenting,
Yeah.
here's
So
what our
if
strategy
you're with your
was.
own country, it's easier to explain your line of reasoning to those around you or like, kind of collaborate with those you worked with throughout the whole entire sim and reflect on your own decisions and how the others impacted you without a blame game being tossed about or kids letting airing their grievances out, while they're supposed to be working.
So in that too, and we have a debrief presentation walkthrough on the dashboard that you can utilize as well if you want. It's under the debrief presentation and essay assignment. Click on that and you can read through it here. Not everybody uses this, and you can also pick and choose from those questions. I'm curious, like, did you use those or did you find some other questions that worked best for you?
We used those, but instead of them doing all of them, we had them choose, or I gave them one of the main options and then had them choose one subtopic to talk about. So everyone had one of the topics to talk about, and then it was kind of related to misinformation in media. How did that impact your decisions and by what you read or what you heard about? And then because an argumentation unit, we added that. So that was kind of one paragraph put together. And then the last paragraph or last section was one of these other ones like power transition, system polarity, and hegemony, and or how the impact of Sapphire Island.
Mhm.
So yeah, the intelligence, secrets, and lies kind of tied into what we were doing in my class at least.
Now, did you have them present that too?
So I had them do it with groups of I guess the groups were made up of kids from different countries, so you got a
Mhm.
more diverse perspective. And I found that the presentation was really similar. Each presentation was similar to one another's because they kind of all wanted to talk about the same things that upset them throughout the whole simulation, which was like the power transition and how so and so's country attacked us and how they had power the entire game. And
Mhm.
yeah,
So it may be more beneficial to keep them in your groups, like you said, so
yeah.
that they're really diving into their strategy. Um,
Hmm.
a benefit to that, especially if they are really taking on their country's role and talking about their strategy throughout the sim, connecting it back to these questions, is we chatted a little bit about this earlier, is to potentially make it open to sixth and seventh graders or to other students in the school, to parents, to administrators, so that there's a greater weight of how important this sim was, that this experience really meant something, and it gets those other students excited about potentially playing it when they get to those grades, whether it be required in the class or an elective course that they get to choose to take. Um, Anything else on those debriefs?
Just like I suppose let the kids have a choice for some of the topics because there were a few in there that the kids really didn't want to talk about because it was either too hard to comprehend it for middle schoolers or it was boring because who cares about peace or things like that. So give them a choice and they'll run with it. So yeah.
Okay. So the autonomy to make those decisions will really help them guide their answers.
Yeah.
So if you did all of these, it would be a total of 11 assignments and sim awards, the 11 assignments being those weekly memos and that presentation. So really 26% of the grade could be tied to it. And we put minimum here just so that you say, these are really recommended. You don't have to, obviously, you're the expert in the class, but like giving them other alternatives, not just saying like, if you win, it's 50% of your grade. No, that's not it. Like there's a lot of other pieces that are the reflective pieces that are important to making sure that you gain an understanding of how it connects to the class. So that's the minimum grading options recommended. Let's dive into advanced grading options. So I'm going to open this up a little bigger now. Just like last time, the registering for statecraft could be 1%. Just again, wanting to get everybody in there as soon as possible. And let's be real, you could create your simulation in August and make it part of the registration process that they, if the sim doesn't start until January, they have 5 months to register. It's part of their class. You could be as prepared as you want as a teacher. The next part is the grading awards assignment. This is new. You'll find this in that same area, and I'll go look for it real quick. In that dashboard, you're going to click on Instructor Manual Materials, and it's that first one, Grading Awards Assignment. There's one for IR Lite, so there is that custom side of that to make it easier on you, Nick. But essentially what this does is it helps students identify which of those goals throughout the entire sim that they want to achieve. Just because they like, oh, we would be so cool to achieve these goals, doesn't mean they're going to remember it, number one, or strategize to achieve it with the actions that they're taking. So by putting this on paper, a spreadsheet, a PDF, whatever it looks like in your class, it helps them identify, number one, which ones they want. Then it says, how does your government type help you achieve this award? And also, how does the country attributes that you've been chosen or you've been given help you achieve this award? They go into their system and they can look at the benefits and the cons to each of those government types and attributes. And maybe they start to realize, well, I don't know if having a pacifist democracy is worth going after a military powerful country. Maybe it is, depending upon the other countries involved in the sim, but it gives them that opportunity to say, this is the one I want based on these things. Now, in the IR full, we have big projects that they can bid on throughout the sim. It requires a hefty amount of resources and a lot of research of technologies. They are huge strategic movers. Sometimes when a student gets it, they really revolutionize their ability to reach the goal above. How are they going about picking those big projects is up to the goals that they've chosen. And so they might find a big project that links with one of those goals. And then they need to know how much of those resources do they need to bid on it. Once they know those resources, again, all of this is in the manual and in the appendix that they can look up through their student portal. They can then say, how do I get those resources? I have a depleted scientific knowledge basin. I don't produce enough of it. I need to figure out how I'm going to create a trade pack, or I'm going to really invest in my food production so that I can trade 1 to 4 on the black market for scientific knowledge. Then they go into identifying which technologies they need to invest in to achieve that big project, as well as by what turn they need to achieve it. So this is giving them a blueprint of their strategy that they probably will not follow to a T, because there's a lot of other factors in the simulation that will influence it, other environmental factors, but it gives them an idea, a strategy foothold to say, here's how you can achieve these. especially for middle school and high schoolers, that strategic process may be not fully, built out yet. Some students are super into games and they understand it like this, but not every student does. So this can be due by the beginning of turn two. So that gives them all turn zero and all of turn one to have already chosen their government types and attributes and voted on their president and looked through these goals and taken the manual quiz one and manual quiz two. So they really have time to invest in understanding this process. So that's the grading awards um, assignment. That could be worth 3% of their grade, and also great to come back to for memos later on. Hey, you're at turn 6. How aligned are you with that grading awards assignment, or how far off are you? The next one here, same thing, simulation manual quizzes due before the end of turn 1, or due before turn 1 and due before turn 2. One is in each. We have our weekly memos, and those can be the prompts that you set up. There are prompts on our website attached to AP classes in line with the simulation, easily accessible, that you can literally just download and use. Then there's the simulation performance. Now, I said awards seen quality of life, and I will bring that up in a second, but this is the competitive and collective awards that we looked at that were each worth 5 points. And so you'll get that at the end of the simulation in that gradebook report, like we looked at earlier. Now, you could have 2 debriefing pieces. First being a paper. Now, what's nice about this is that it gives the student a chance to read through their memos, to identify parts of their strategies, and then to answer questions, whether they're those same questions that are on the outline presented right here, or they can choose you can choose a specific prompt for them to answer, for them to fill out a 1 to 3 page paper, keeping in mind it has to be from their experience. So they're not going to chat GPT to answer this. They have to pull it from what they've already written and their experiences. Now, why that's important to do before the presentation is because it gives them that individual reflection time, so that when they come to their group, they now have a lot more to offer in terms of a group reflection when they're presenting to their classmates. If you've ever been told to just improvise on a stage, not everyone is the best at that. Now, if you've done something in your life, and let's say you've built a chicken coop and they've told you, hey, we want you to give a presentation right now on building a chicken coop. You have the experience to do it, but you may not have it fleshed out. So again, that individual analysis can really help bring that to the group presentation. All right, so those are 2 big chunks there at the end. I'm gonna take a quick pause. Thoughts on that one, Nick?
I was just going to say that part of the debrief, like you've mentioned, it is really important for students to be able to look back at their memos and see where they were at that time in the simulation. Because what I did last year was have them kind of give a general, consensus on how they're feeling about the simulation, what are some major events going on, just to keep track of things that happened and when. Because I found that by the end of the simulation, some kids couldn't remember if they were attacked on turn 3 or if they were attacked on turn 2, or if their army or their allies' army grew too large on turn 2 or turn 4, and they just got confused with everything. So just adding a little component of like what's some major events going on at this time helps them a lot when it comes back to look, or when it comes back to talking about the final presentation. They're more clear timeline of events.
That is a huge piece for sure. Like, especially if there's 10 turns, right? Even if it's 4, that still could be a little cloudy. But once you start getting to 7 to 10 turns in the simulation, it's like, I know this happened. I can't specify exactly when, but it might be so paramount to know that, hey, they attacked us here because this trade deal that we had talked about actually was right before that in the same turn. And then they overtook us. And so now I don't trust them this exact turn. I thought it was 2 turns before that or something. So the timeline phase of those memos can be very helpful in those references. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to jump the next one into this quality of life. So we've talked about quality of life. I will show you again on that grading recommendations what each of those quality of life references are coming down here. So we have fair quality of life, respectable, superior, and then incomparable. So I mentioned her in multiple meetings and workshops, but Dr. Marianne Gallagher, who uses statecraft at University of Georgia and has for like a decade, found that about year 4 or 5, she started to add quality of life as an overall 5% of the grade. And so what this did was it made students have to focus on their people. That is the difference between an A and an A plus, potentially. So if you're not focusing on your domestic factions, then you're not getting those 5 points, number one. And number two, you're not doing half of the game. It's a 2-level game, domestic and international. So having that focus gives them that foresight to say, if we start investing now in turn 1, by turn whatever, when the simulation finishes, we've at least made an attempt to please these people. Versus, oh my gosh, it might be the last turn, it's turn 6, we haven't invested anything, we probably should do something, and even if we do really well, it's an average of all the points, so it's still going to be a very low average. So really investing in that helps students, again, focus on that long-term process of gaining quality of life points. So that's 5% of a grade if you want. A few years ago, we added in peer evaluations. So at the end of a simulation, you can go in and you can say how well your peers in your team invested in the process of making decisions with that country. That can be 2% of the grade. You can make that as however much you want, obviously. But adding that piece in it, especially knowing that going into the sim, can help prevent students from free riding, especially if you get larger groups. When I played the sim, I want to say 7 or 8 of us on a team, and we did a really good job of dividing and conquering. Everybody had their specific role, but that doesn't mean that every class is exactly like that. And so if you emphasize that peer evaluation, it can be really helpful in preventing that free riding. The historian's verdict, this is provided at the end in that grade report. If a country is not engaging in an unprovoked nuclear war attack, then they get this. It's a 10-point thing. So if they get that 10 points, it's 2% of their grade. Obviously, it's up to you as to whether or not you want to encourage or discourage that. But it is there just to say it could be part of this. And then the last bit here are the bonus points. So this could be either 5% of the overall grade or just 5% of bonus points. So over here on the right side, bonus points, 0.5% for each student in a country that gives a State of the Union per turn. So let's say that you give the option every peer or every turn that you're playing in the class. Hey, we're going to spend the first 10 minutes of our simulation today. Option is to do a State of the Union. Does anybody want to give a State of the Union? If a president comes up every single time, they can get 0.5% for everybody in their team, and that maxes out at 5%. So it's kind of a combination of all these bonus point options if they want. 0.5% for each student in a country that agrees to a UN resolution and abides by it through the remainder of the sim. So if they come together and they say, we need to resolve this terrorist deal, we're creating this resolution, we want to make sure we abide by it, no one goes back on it, everybody signs it. If it's abided by for the rest of the sim, all of those countries and all the students in those countries get 0.5% for that. 0.5% for every grading quiz you receive a 90% or higher on. So now there's some options, and I think these are mostly in the IR full, but if you jump into, let's jump into this one. There's going to be a bunch of grading quizzes. So I'm going to jump into a fake student here. Leah Bastian. And I'm going to scroll down on the left side to quizzes. Well, of course it's going to tell me to do this now. Well, we can look at it from our test bank side. So quizzes list, I already showed you those manual quizzes. There's a bunch of other quizzes in here too. Now, these are probably going to be directed more at colleges and college level students. But again, as a bonus, it doesn't mean that a middle school or a high school can't take this. If they take them and they get a 90% or higher, that's just bonus points. So what you're doing at this point is encouraging that they invest more time and energy into thinking about these things. And at the end of the day, maybe this actually helps them in the simulation. So levels of analysis of international relations, they can go in here and take those quizzes, um, all on their own. So that's an option for those bonus points there. The last part is the resource quizzes. And I know, Nick, you've done this outside the sim, which is fantastic. If you end up using the IR full with your 8th graders at some point, all that's built in here. So for example, I could create a resource quiz that when a student answers that question right, blah, 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 I can give them one of these things and a specific amount of that resource. And so it automatically puts in the system for you instead of you having to input it in the IR Lite. So really helpful to have those. I always recommend creating your questions, your quizzes outside of the sim in a Google Doc and then transporting them in. But a really great resource. And kind of like you said, is the students are like, oh my gosh, if I do well on these, it actually helps me in the sim. That really builds on that momentum that they're already putting in. So those are the bonus points. If you did all of those, it could be 52 to 62% of the course overall. Now you can change the percentages and you don't have to use all of those at all. You can pick and choose. But as an advanced grading option, I hope that gives you an idea of a lot of the different ways that you could incorporate that. Any questions on this before we go into other incentives?
I'm good.
Cool. All right. So other incentives. If you have multiple classes using this throughout the school year, this may be one you want to think about, Nick. Bonus points for the top 3 countries with the highest scores in all of the classes playing during the same time frame. So I know that all of your 8th graders are playing this. If you have a board somewhere in the school, a public place that has those scores for those top 3, then you can say, all right, here's where we're at. You can really start to put some pressure on these students and say, like, this is a public thing. And it's kind of a cool idea for a student to win and be like, I was top 3, it was a different class in this one. And it may all come from the same class, you never know. But having those top 3 countries could be really cool at the end of the sim.
I actually
Pete,
really like that idea because I do plan on having, I think, 4 classes going at once. And for 2 of those classes, they're going to be tied in with another 2 classes across the hall where they're like from a different team. And it'll be like one class and another or 2 full classes together where they're not going to see everyone all the time. That create a lot of opportunity for chaos and fun.
oh heck
So
yeah. Dude, that's a great call. There's going to be a lot of scheming and being like, are we on top? Who's on top now? And you may want to look at the instructor dashboard in that sense. You're not going to be able to get the end results until the end of the sim. But if you go through, let's go to the middle one here. If you go through some of these countries and start to see like who's more balanced, who's more security focused, you could say who's trading the most. Here's the countries that are trading the most on, and that might be an encouraging piece to be like, maybe I should trade more. So things that you might see that throughout the sim could be helpful, and then looking at a public place and being like, wow, that country's trading a lot. Maybe we should trade with them too. Finding ways to do that publicly could be helpful. Pizza party prize or prize, depending upon your budget, for the class that achieves the highest collective quality of life overall score. Sometimes because, if you do put that into that final grade as 5% or whatever percent and saying that this is important, we want you to focus on your domestic factions, we want you to do really well. So if your class does the best, here's a prize for it. And then the last one is a plaque in the awards display. Some schools have those, glass awards displays. If you just start, with a plaque that's got the name of the country, and you can add to it every year so that when those students come back to the school, they see their name and there's their country name. That really puts some longevity into it, and again emphasizes how important this experience can be for students. For an individual class, a debrief presentation pizza day, just knowing that they're going to have pizza or hanging out of sorts. Um, with country and student superlatives, that's always fun. If you're saying, like this person's like the most like the largest change in what do you call it? Extroverted for introverted to extroverted, which would be what was her face?
Oh, that would be Lillian.
Lillian. Yeah. So it'd be like the largest change in introversion to extroversion, you get this award kind of thing. And having that kind of be more of a fun time for them because uh sometimes the emotions, like you said, Nick, can run high. And so
Yeah.
kind of just, putting those to the side and let's have some fun with this. Um, you could also do something on the lines, instead of a pizza day, the students come up with their national food and they cook it and bring it in. And so they're really investing in their own countries at that point. The winning country in the sim is honored at the following school assembly. And so again, this being a more public recognition of their work. Um, and maybe they have made their own flag and they get to like show off their flag of their country. And then the last part here is awards in the class. And so as when you have your debrief presentation, you can also have the awards, like the most military powerful, the healthiest. If those awards that you have, whether it be literally a plate or something else, are awarded by a distinguished person in the school or even the community who's come into that classroom to really emphasize that importance. So a lot of this is about emphasizing the work that the students are putting into this, and celebrating it too.
I was
Any
thinking about
thoughts?
having I was thinking about having an idea where like you said with the flags, like where when students make their countries, they come up with the flag idea based on whatever it is they want to have on there. Get some construction paper or like a big sheet of paper for them to make an actual flag and then hang those up around the classroom. And those could be your way to like keep track of like who has the most scores at this time and phrase them like that. So you can
Ooh,
see
that's a
live
great
action, like
idea.
when their points are changing. To go with that, when you guys finish it up, you can pin like the healthiest country award to that flag and have like that physical representation that can hang in the year the rest of the day, and kids can continue to brag about it until the next school's over.
That continual bragging right is
Oh
really,
yeah,
it weighs real heavily for sure on them.
these younger kids, absolutely.
I mean, I want that too, let's be real.
Yeah.
Um, Cool. All right. So that's some incentives here. There's one more incentive option that you can get into. And this is something that I'm going to let you brag about a little bit. I'll go through some of this, but that cross-discipline connection. And the reason why this is an incentive is because, just like you mentioned now, Nick, of like creating that poster, what if that was a project in their art class? What if
Mm-hmm.
they're literally building this out for a grade in their class and they're also saying it's going to help me here? So I know that you already do a lot of that and you're actively trying to connect more of these classes. I'm curious from your perspective how you've seen students in their incentive, like their intrinsic incentive, grow or shrink with those connections to other classes.
What we've done last year, which is our first year doing it, was getting the social studies department involved with me on these things. So because their classroom's right next to mine, I was able to work closely with them. But they had set up an assignment where they had to make a constitution for their country and abide by those rules, and those were dictated by their government choices. So if they were dictatorship, they'd have a different looking constitution than a monarchy would. And throughout the simulation, they kept on giving smaller little assessments, like what would a country with a dictator do in this situation, and if they answered them correctly, they would get resource points, and that was like an incentive for students to participate in their other class and receive points for this, so they can see it transfer over. And I can't tell you how many times the other teacher came over, like, how many points am I allowed to give them for this? And like nothing over 100.
So you started to see, you really tied these to resources in the
Mm-hmm.
sim. So it was more than just like a grade in those classes. It was like it's all coming back to the sim in that point, which is that's
And if
brilliant.
they were, most kids didn't always have a group member, but because we can keep track of who's in whose group, and there's usually 4 kids per group, so you break it up. If every kid gets an A on this assignment, you get 25 points per A, 20 points per B. And so some kids were getting 100 extra resources per turn because of these weekly assignments. And so that gets the engagement level up, not just in the class that we're teaching, but in the classes that they're learning about as well, like science, social studies, and math.
Wow. And you were teaching ELA.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like you're really bringing this into a network and like a community of learning at that point.
We're trying to expand more into science this year because I noticed last year not a single simulation completed the save the world goal. They all like got too distracted with either trying to make nuclear weapons or start wars. They, they didn't
Yep.
focus on the world itself. So having the science teacher come in and kind of emphasize the importance of this is what happens when global warming isn't, combated.
And I think, yeah, I put that in here mainly referencing your classes, but the science and AP environmental science teacher to create a paper comparing effects of global warming in real life to the investments in or to those in the simulation. So like, cool, what does this actually look like in the simulation, and how is that happening in the real world?
Mm-hmm.
Again, really connecting those pieces so students are seeing that it's all interdisciplinary. It really is like that. You go out in the real world and you can't ignore one thing or the other. It's all connected
Mm-hmm.
at that point. So
Something, so I know last time we talked, I was writing a grant for getting a giant map made for the classroom, and we ended up winning.
congratulations.
Unfortunately, unfortunately the 3D printed model of the map would be really expensive, so we decided to kind of do it old school, and my family started doing the foam cutout of like the terrain, and we plan on having it painted up so it looks like the map from the simulation, and using like a blue construction paper type material to like show the change in water level at per turn,
That's
because
amazing.
that'll start showing, hey, here's your country, here's where your country was supposed to be, and now half of it's underwater,
Yep. So
and
you're
they can
okay.
see the change of it there.
You're literally taking this to a physical realm where
Yeah,
the incentivization is not just like, all right, cool, like if I get this I get a grade. It's like I feel it, I see it, it's surrounding me. We could have flags on the walls, like everything. I'm immersed in this
because a
simulation.
lot of time, because it is digital, which is awesome because you get all the AI, like they got the AI, but like the artificial aspect for it, where you get the emails and all that. It doesn't always make it easy for kids to see that their country's shrinking. Like if they're not paying attention to the size of the country, they might realize by the end of the game, like, oh, my country's a third of its size. Like, what happened? So this will show them in real time where the water level's at, and they can put little like toothpick flags in there where their country's supposed to be and change it up depending on what class is in there. And we're excited for it.
Cool. Well, congratulations on that. That's pretty
Oh,
exciting.
thanks.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the gist of it. At this point, if you haven't signed up for our final workshop, please do so. It's the instructor controls, as it says double right here.
That's very important.
We're
Very
gonna we'll go more into the instructor controls and how to use those, and kind of those, as some people call them, the God controls, the levers that you can pull behind the scenes.
important.
The instructor competition is in February for the IR sim and in March for the US Gov sim. So sign up for those. If you have not yet checked out our Reddit, or you would like to, go ahead and jump over to our Reddit channel. It has a bunch of the assignments that we chatted about in last workshop in here, um, all accessible for you to make a copy of and use on your own. And then, yeah, set up your simulation. Go for it and have some fun with it. If you have any other questions, myself and our support team is available for that. But with that, thank you for your time.